The pictures that are playing on the screen here are pictures from some of the apartment buildings that we're organizing in the Liberty City area of Miami, which is the traditional African-American community, and it's one of the poorest in the country. But many of the same pictures are also true in a lot of the Latino communities there as well, where we've gone from slumlords to speculators who thought that they could flip the buildings during the big real estate bubble, to then foreclosure, where banks are now owning these buildings. And I put these pictures up here for two reasons. One is that the faces that are here, the pictures that are here, these are the conditions that exist now, but in the scheme of what's playing out historically in this moment, what we have to understand is that these pictures, these faces, are really the precondition to human disaster. These are the pictures of the people who were there before Katrina hit. The pictures that we're seeing here are the conditions that allow things like hurricanes and floods and other man-made disasters to be actually murderous. When I was young, I always wondered why in the third world, when there was an earthquake the same size as the one that hit here, why thousands of people died. And the reason for that is because the infrastructure in many places in the world was not built to withstand instability and disaster. And what's happened with Katrina was the wake-up call that that reality has come to the United States as well. And not only what happened in Katrina in the Gulf Coast, but bridges collapsing in Minnesota, the floods in Iowa, and time after time after time of places where our public infrastructure and the private infrastructure that's supposed to house and hold people is failing. We're in this period where the present crises of people's daily lives are the preconditions of potential bigger disasters to come. And I say that and think for all of us, Katrina was the wake-up call, but we have to be real then about, well, what is that phenomenon that is bringing that here? And Drummond started by saying, well, 28 years ago, he remembers when it was different. In the third world, they call what's happened over the last 28, 30 years neoliberalism, which is a political movement to actually undermine public infrastructure, a political movement to actually move and shift wealth and resources and decision-making to a private group of corporations and those who already have money to be the decision-makers in society. It's actually a privatization not only of government functions, of the reduction of social services, but in fact, it's been a complete privatization of our practice of democracy. So that now when we go back to take over government structures, when we go back and try to contend to take back the programs that traditionally saved the public good, it is not only those programs that have been gone for 30 years, the very nature of government and democracy has been transformed by the practice of actually transforming the state infrastructure, public infrastructure, to handing it over to private benefit. So our strategies then to confront this reality aren't just to go back to what was. The question is, how do we envision a path forward from the destruction over the last 30 years that we've witnessed? And this destruction has been particularly strong in our cities. Our cities, which are the home to now not only the majority of the people in the United States, but for the first time in 2008, the majority of the world's population now lives in cities. And cities are the places where policies and politics and pollutants are created. It is in cities that we are now engaging in what is this new world. And for all of y'all who watched the primaries and looked at CNN as they kept showing those maps and showed all of the big areas that were won by one candidate, and then the winning candidate had a tiny bits of spots on the map, and you're saying, well, how do you win with that? Because those are the places that are, A, the concentration of people in the cities, in the metropolitan areas, but they've also historically been the concentration of progressive power. The concentration of where progressive policies have often come from. The concentration of people of color, of immigrants. The place where the progressive perspective has a home. And in this neoliberal world, those progressive blocs, particularly in working class communities of color, have increasingly been displaced and destroyed, which not only destroys those communities and neighborhoods, but displaces the progressive power and potential as well. And so it's with that reality and the fact that what we have been doing hasn't been working, just fighting for education or housing or transportation or around criminal justice in silos as issues, has run up against the fact that the entire system of governance has gone the other way, so that our tools that we use no longer function as well. So what we did as we faced these challenges is that a number of organizations got together and formed the Right to the City Alliance. And the Right to the City Alliance, from the beginning, started with the analysis of what's happened to our cities under neoliberalism. And two, facing the reality that what we've done has not worked. And we started with a frame, and the frame didn't start with an issue, it started with the phenomenon of displacement, but really started with the fact that if we were going to turn things around, the point wasn't to pick which issue to start with. The point was to start with the fundamental basis of democracy itself in our cities. From how planning and zoning was happening, to budgeting, to the very concept of who has a right to make decisions in the city. That right, which was getting further and further eroded because you were a felon, because you were an immigrant, because of your credit status, because you didn't own the city or property.